Hello and welcome to the Emotion at Work podcast, where we place emotion at the heart of the people, the processes and the place of work, creating work environments where people feel safe, where they feel optimistic and where they feel confident. And today's episode is the second in our series specifically focusing on emotion in teams. So over the last few years, we've been developing a blueprint for high-performing teams, which has emotion at the heart of it. And as the intro suggests, emotion is something that is present in the people, the processes, and the place of work. And so what we find is there are 8 components or 8 processes, 8 elements that sit within teams that have emotion kind of almost like riddled all the way through them. And when harnessed, can create those teams that are high performing, because I think, as I mentioned in the previous episode or the first one of this series, you can't think yourself into high performance. If high performance is where you want to be, emotion has got to be part of the picture. So last time then we focused on 4 elements of the blueprint, and in particular we looked at meetings. We looked at accountability, we looked at relationships, and we looked at decision making. And so that leaves us then today instead thinking about the remaining 4 areas, which are communication, well-being, recognition, and performance. So you might say, well, why is performance a section on its own? Because surely if the whole thing is about creating high-performing teams, why do you need a section on performance? And my answer will come later on when we get there. So we'll look at performance as the final element, and it deserves and needs its place on its own. And I'll tell you a bit more about why a bit later on. So one of the things that I was also thinking was, if I was in your shoes, fair listener, I might be thinking, well, it's all very well hearing from you, Phil, but what about hearing from other people? And so the future episodes in this series, we're going to be bringing in Kim Brosnan, who's someone who works with us and has been working with a couple of different projects of ours, looking at how we implement the blueprint across those particular projects. So you get to hear from Kim as well as me, as Kim and I who lead on this work with the clients that we work with. And also we'll have a client on sharing some of their experiences in terms of their experiences from working with us as well. I think to begin with, though, I thought I'd begin with a project director who we've been working with recently, who said, you're adding real value in calling out what's needing to be addressed and helping us move things forward. This is a winning formula that we need to keep replicating. So what is the rest of that formula? Well, let's begin then with communication. So communication, I guess, there's some different elements to it or different components to it. So partly within communication, we are looking at the formal communication methods. So we've already kind of covered off one of those. So in an earlier version of the blueprint, communication was a bit of a catch-all for everything. And then what we figured out is actually meetings in particular can either be that real kind of propeller of performance, it can propel performance forward, or it could be something that drags performance down. So that's why we put meetings in their own right, because even though they are a method and a means of communication, actually they need attention in their own right to do that and look at that well. So communication then is looking at both the formal and the informal components of communication across a team or across a project. So within that, for example, we might include things like newsletters. Now, sometimes newsletters can be like physical newsletters that are actually printed out and kind of placed around cabins or placed on site or on notice boards or whatever that may be. Newsletters can also be like weekly updates and weekly bulletins. Could be those kinds of things. Communication also includes how we communicate what's happening on the project. So, for example, do we have a performance dashboard? if we do have a performance dashboard, where does that sit? Do we have a program? And if we do have the program, how do we communicate that out? Is it something that sits on a shared drive? Is it something that's on a wall and is updated regularly? How do we communicate the kind of key artifacts of what's happening and what's going on around us? So how do we communicate things around safety? How do we communicate things around what the kind of priority areas are for this day or this shift or this week? So that system of communication is really important. And one of the things that a lot of the projects that we've worked on have struggled with is to get the balance of the kind of the maybe what I'm going to call the typical organizational cascade of communication. So where it starts at the top from the project manager or the project director and then works its way down the hierarchy. And also doing kind of communication to everybody at the same time. Because one of the challenges with teams, this challenge is true of whether it be construction teams, which is the examples I've been giving of through these couple of episodes of the podcast, and it's also true of asynchronous teams. It's true of dispersed and distributed teams. It's true of teams that might work on different work patterns or be together physically in person or remotely on different days. And so the flow of information around a team is really important, and that's why communication is there. Now, meetings are a vehicle to communicate, and so the effectiveness of the meetings, therefore, is really critical, because if the meetings are ineffective, the flow of communication can be stifled, or can be stopped because of the processes that sit around it. So, what are our key recommendations when it comes to communication? So one of those is you need to have strategies for communicating to all and communicating in a cascade way. And if you only have one or the other, the chances are that you're not going to get to a point where your team is high performing, because you're not getting the information to the people that need it when they need it. So the communication to all, what that does is it allows whichever medium you use. So on different projects at different times, we have used newsletters. We have used sort of a town hall style approach where we physically get everybody together and speak with everybody at the same time. We've also had sort of end of the week updates or end of the day updates from key people within the team to say, this is what's important today, this is what's happening today. So having that communication to all is important because it allows you that opportunity to get a consistent message out to everybody at the same time. So if there are particular things that are important, whether that be it might be there's a specific sequence of events that's happening, or it might be that two teams have to work together or two sub-teams have to work together to deliver a particular element. Or it could be that actually this thing is just really important to the project right now, whether that be safety or quality, could be time, could be cost, whatever it is, that communicating to all bits really important. And so the common tools at your disposal would include things like all hands or town hall meetings, newsletters, and whether they be physical or email based, or you could also use things like SharePoint. You can have a document on SharePoint, a PDF type thing. And it could also be kind of whole team emails as well. But you need to have that one-to-many communication. You also need to have plans for how we're going to cascade information. And part of that is about being clear about what the expectation is. So if for example, the project manager, the project director sends a communication to their immediate team, how explicit is that communication in terms of what the immediate team need to do with that? Is this for information? Is it for information and share when you're ready? Is it for information and share now? Is it for information and can you have a conversation with your teams about this rather than just forward on an email? So being really clear when you are using that kind of cascade and flow down of information, being clear about what it is that people need to do with the information that you're sending. And often when things are left ambiguous, it means that there is room for misinterpretation or misrepresentation. So the clearer you can be in terms of what's expected to be done with the communication that you're sharing, and what, if anything, needs to be shared, when it needs to be shared, how it needs to be shared, is really important. And sometimes you might want to be really specific. This information needs to go to these people today, and I want you to get them in a room or get them around to, get everybody together physically to have that discussion. Or it might be everybody needs to know this by the end of Tuesday because something's happening on Thursday, as an example. But if we're unclear or ambiguous in the way we're communicating it, that could be difficult. So that clarity and in terms of expectation and clarity in terms of message are really important when we're thinking about how do we use the hierarchy within the team to share key bits of information and to communicate that around. When we then think about the kind of one-to-all communication, again, what we need to think about really carefully there is who are our audience? Who is it that we're speaking with? Who is it we're speaking to? And what's the key information that they need to know? And how do we deliver that information in a way that makes it really easy for people to hear? Now, this is the distinction I'm going to make. Saying something in a way that feels comfortable for you could be the same as saying something in a way that people find it easy to hear. And often it can be different. Now, you might say, in this particular podcast episode, I am literally having to role model what it is that I want. Because I'm having to think about in the sort of the sequence and the structure and the organization of this episode, how can I do this in a way that makes it as easy as possible for you, fair listener, to listen? How do I do this in a way that makes it as easy as possible for you to take in the key points and key messages that I want to share? So what you'll have noticed is that there's been some key messages that I'm trying to help you hear as the listener. One of those is that there needs to be this combination of thinking about how do you communicate to all as well as down through the hierarchy. Also, when we are thinking about how we communicate down the hierarchy, we need to think about how are we clear in our expectations in terms of what's to be communicated to when and by whom. And then when we're thinking about how we communicate to all, we need to be thinking, what is it that we want the audience to hear? And how do we communicate this in a way that best helps the audience hear that? And one of the things is storytelling. So stories engage people. So a lot of the time when I'm working with people that are leading, especially if it's like an all hands meeting or a town hall meeting, crafting the story that we want to tell prior to doing it is really important. On a lot of teams I work with, when they need to do like an all hands or a town hall type communication, there's very little thought that goes into it. We just kind of rock up and we do it, and that will work. What will work better is thinking of the story that you want to tell and crafting that story around it. And so that's what we do a lot of the time with the projects that we work with, is we craft the story. That could be the story of the week, could be the story of the day. What's the story that we want people to be telling each other? What are the stories that we want people to be repeating? Because stories are what hold attention. So when we think about communication then, if it's that in-person, not necessarily in person, if that's that one-to-all communication, which could be in person, could also be through a newsletter or something we print out, put up on a wall, and all of those things I've said already, that also needs the story crafted around it. What's the story that we want to tell so that we can make it as easy as possible for people to hear? When we're thinking about communicating kind of through the hierarchy, again, then we're thinking within that about how do we make sure we are really clear and we're really explicit about what our expectations are in terms of what's being communicated, by whom and when. And if we can do that, that'd be really helpful. Now, if you want to know more about storytelling in terms of different storytelling methodologies, I'll put my favorite one as a link in the show notes. So my favorite one is the Hero's Journey, favorite framework I use to tell stories. And And if you're interested in how we do that, then give me a shout and let me know. We can do more, and I'll put a link to the model so that you've got an idea of the kind of things that we would look to hang the story from. Okay, so my reflexive questions for you then is, when you're thinking about communication in your team, what is your one-to-all approach to communication? How are you making sure that that one-to-all communication is done in a way that is as easy as possible for people to hear? And what stories are you telling as part of that? And similarly, when you're thinking about that kind of through the hierarchy communication, what is it? How clear are you in terms of your expectations and what's being communicated by whom and when? And so those are the things that we will instantly look at when we start to think about communication within teams, because they are things that are often easily missed. We think communication is just something that happens easily, and it really doesn't. It takes much more deliberateness, purposefulness. So we're doing something deliberately and we're doing it on purpose. And that's the approach that we take to thinking about how we build communication with the teams that we work with. So I'm going to encourage you to pause. Have a think about those two reflective questions. When you're ready, press play, come back, and we'll go again with the next area. And welcome back. So where we're going to go next then is to look at well-being. Now, well-being is something that you could look at in a whole host of different ways. You could look at physical well-being. You could look at relationship well-being. You could look at emotional well-being, mental well-being, financial well-being. All of these things are important. And when we think about the work that we do, in particular, we're interested in emotional well-being. Now, yes, our emotions are impacted by our relationships. They're impacted by how we are physically. They are impacted by how we feel about how sort of safe we feel. So that can link into financial well-being. Also links into mental well-being, and at the same time, the lens that we take is when we're looking at emotional well-being in particular. So we're particularly interested in how are people expressing their emotions? How are they regulating their emotions? How are they working with their emotions in a way that helps them engage in the team in a constructive way? Now, my hypothesis would be that if you can help, if you can help, sorry, let me try that again. My hypothesis is that somebody who has good emotional well-being, that in the same way that relationships and mental and physical can impact emotion, emotion can also impact those other elements as well. So how we, as sort of, I know, coaches, consultants, facilitators, how we work with teams in particular is about how do we help them express how they're feeling. And sometimes that could be like in a team setting or in a group setting, maybe it could be in a meeting, but it could also be about how do they express that to someone who can listen and not need to do anything with what they hear. So what I mean by that is often I think in the workplace, when somebody expresses to us how they're feeling as individuals or maybe as a manager or as a supervisor, we want to try and fix that and help make that better. And actually sometimes we don't need to do that. What we need to do is just listen and help that person express how they're feeling and then help them move on with where they want to go next or what they need to do next. So we take a lot of attention into how do we help people express how they're feeling. And one of the ways that we do that is by analyzing behavior. So we're constantly listening attentively, watching closely, thinking about what the message that's being given off as well as the message that's being given. So I might be giving you a message, but I'm also giving off another message. So I'm saying one thing, but I might be giving off a different message alongside that. And so that's one of the skills that we bring in terms of what does sort of typical behavior look like for this person in this context? And then to what extent are we seeing changes or deviations from that typical behavior from that person in that context? Or what might be behind that? because often what's behind it is emotion. And so if we're seeing behavior that's changing, behavior that's different, what myself and Kim will do is we'll notice that. Now, sometimes we might do something about it there and then. So we might say, oh, it looks like this is something particularly important to you, Phil. Is there something you'd like to add? Or, Phil, it seems as though you might have something that you're thinking or feeling about this. Is there something you would want to add to the discussion? So we might bring somebody in there and then. But it also might be about catching up with them separately on a one-to-one afterwards to say, what's happening for you when we were in that meeting earlier on today? And what we'll start to do is to normalize the expression of emotion in the different discussions and conversations that people are having. So sometimes that might happen, for example, in a meeting. It also might happen in a one-to-one discussion, might happen in a corridor conversation. So sometimes I'll just be stood making a cup of tea, listening to what's happening around me, noticing something about someone's behavior, thinking, oh, there's something in that, and then looking to go and find out some more. So understanding and supporting individuals with considering what is it that they're feeling and how are they expressing that in a way that helps support the project achieving the goals that it's looking to achieve. Now, often in a lot of workplaces, when emotional well-being isn't as good as it could be, what you experience is flooding out episodes, which is where emotions kind of flood out of people. So you might see that might come out in somebody crying, it might come out in somebody shouting, it might come out of somebody leaving a meeting or leaving a conversation saying, you know what, I can't do this, and then just turning around and walking away, or leaving a virtual meeting. And that's because the emotions got so much that they can't regulate it anymore. And so one of the things that we are looking for is, how are people regulating the different emotions that they're feeling, and what can we do to help support people with that? And sometimes that might be through a one-to-one discussion, one-to-one conversation. It might be through a multiple kind of one-to-one discussions. It also may be about mentioning something there and then in an interaction to bring somebody in and help them express how they feel. And so by normalizing that expression of emotion in a constructive way, it helps other people then start to feel that confidence, to feel that optimism, and to feel that safety that they can start to contribute and be part of it. So when we think about emotional well-being, what are the three things that I want you as the listener to focus on? So one is understanding emotional well-being needs to be contextual. So thinking about how does this person typically behave in this context, and then noticing changes from that can give us a real indication into somebody's emotional well-being. Secondly, when someone expresses how they feel, other people don't need to hold it and they don't need to solve it. So helping other people express how they feel, and then maybe following up with a question like, is there something that you need from me right now? Is there something I can do to help with that? Often the answer is no, I just feel better to have said it, which is great, fantastic, wonderful, and then we can move on. And the third thing then is to remember that we're there to help, but we're not there to find out everything. So sometimes it might be that we are seeing some changes in behavior, and we might try and see if we can figure out what's happening for that individual. But if they don't want to share, then that's okay. And we can come back and review that and look at that at another time. The emotional well-being then has that knock-on impact of other areas, because if we can help somebody regulate and express their emotions in a constructive way, we reduce the likelihood of flooding out episodes. We also increase the likelihood that somebody's overall mental well-being or physical well-being and others are also going to be positively impacted as a result of that improved emotional well-being. So my reflective questions for you then. What do you do? How do you notice how other people might be thinking and feeling? What is it that you're paying attention to in terms of behavior in context that would help you understand how somebody is feeling and maybe therefore what they're thinking? And then what can you do to listen well, remembering that you don't need to solve it and you don't need to take that emotion or that feeling off of somebody else? So that's my reflective question for you. Hit pause when you're ready, come back, hit play, and we'll go with the next one. And welcome back. So next we're going to go to look at recognition. Now, it's interesting because recognition can often be one of the areas that causes a lot of debate and discussion. Because often what happens in teams on projects is we focus on things that aren't working. Now, you could probably say, Phil, this is true of a lot of organizations and a lot of teams. And yes, it probably is. And at the same time, creating a sense within the team that we do recognize when things go well, that we do celebrate the successes and the wins that we have, and that we also reinforce the kinds of behaviors we want to see. So one of the things that often sort of drives down teams or sort of pulls team performance down is the tolerance of behaviors that we don't want to see or don't want to experience. And so how do we do that? Well, yes, we need to address the behaviors we don't want to see, especially if they're safety related or maybe they're sort of destructive for the team. As well as addressing the behaviors that we need to address, we also want to amplify and celebrate the behaviors that we do want to see. So if somebody's doing something, collaborating maybe, I had a wonderful example of one of the projects I was working on where a member of the team would go out of their way to make sure the sequencing of their work was going to support the sequencing of other people's work. So if I do this on Friday and I'm finished by this time, will that allow you to do your bit? And so I spent some specific time with that individual focusing on recognizing that that was a behavior that was really important to the success of the project. Now, it can't all be down to me. Now, the reason I say I spent some time with is because on that particular project, the senior project manager had an understandable view, which was that that's what they're paid to do, Phil. Right? That's what they should do. That's that collaboration and that consideration of other people is how they should be behaving. I said, yes, absolutely. Are they though? So yes, it's how they should be behaving. Are they though? I mean, the fact that you've used the word should in your sentence suggests that they're not, because if they were, you'd be saying that's the way they are behaving. So therefore, we don't need to recognize it. And we can also see from the different performance elements that we're looking at that we're not where we need to be. So therefore, we know sequencing causes us a problem. So what I want to do is to really big up that person and really recognize and almost not, I don't want to go so far that I'm kind of putting them out in front of the rest of the project team and I'm giving them a trophy and giving them an extra day off because of the amazing work that they've done. And at the same time, it's really appropriate for me to go over and say, thank you so much for that. That's really important. What you've just done there and that approach that you've taken makes a massive difference to this project. And I'm really grateful that you did it in that way. Thank you so much. And in a way, maybe that's even easier for me to do as the kind of consultant, coach, facilitator within it. What we found harder to do across a number of different projects that we've done is to create that culture of appreciation or that culture of recognition. I know I've used the C word. I'm not sure if I've used it much during these episodes because I try not to, because it's like culture just says everything and nothing altogether at the same time. So creating those examples where we are recognizing and celebrating the successes and the wins that we have, where we are encouraging and recognizing, providing that recognition for the behaviors that we really, really want to see. And I think for me that one of the things that I really pay attention to when we first get together with a team is how often do they say thank you to each other, which might seem like a really small thing, and it's a key element of recognition. How often are they saying, oh, thank you for doing that, thank you for that, that's been really helpful, I really appreciate what you've done there, that's really great. How often are we sharing that kind of gratitude and appreciation? Because if it's hardly ever happening, then the risk is that it sets like an expectation that that you should just do. And maybe I'm kind of going, I don't know, maybe this is an ethics and a values thing for me, as well as it being supported by the research, that doing those moments of recognition, those moments of appreciation, those moments of thank you can have a massive impact on how people are feeling and how they're thinking about the project. And it can be difficult. It can feel weird. I remember when I was working with a team in a retail setting, and I had all sort of 60, I think it was the top 60 leaders of the organization together. And I had half an hour in the agenda for the day where I wanted them to go around and share some appreciation with each other. So I want you to go and find somebody who has done something or said something that has sort of had a positive impact for you, that's been meaningful for you. I want you to go find that person and tell them that you're grateful, you're appreciative. Tell them thank you and tell them what you're thankful for. Yeah, be specific. And the energy in the room was amazing. And we ended up with half an hour, and then I tried to put it together and close it off after the half an hour in the agenda. And then I got told off for doing so because everybody was enjoying it so much, because it happens so infrequently, that they wanted to do it more. So how does the team, or maybe if you're thinking reflectively in your teams, how do you do that recognition? How do you do that appreciation? Creating that environment where people share that recognition is really, really important for the success and high performing teams, because what it does is it recognizes, values and appreciates the behaviors that you really, really want to see. And so I know some people find it difficult. So persistence and determination is the way to go. So thinking about your team then, what are the behaviors that make a difference that don't get recognized? So what are the behaviors that make a difference in your team that don't get recognized as often as they could? Think about a meeting you've got coming up in your diary, and keep a record of how many times people are sharing some appreciation, even if it's a simple thank you. How many times are people sharing appreciation within that kind of discussion, within that meeting? And then what can you do to help share that recognition that supports the behaviors that you want to see and provides that appreciation and that gratitude for the work and effort that people are putting in? So those are your reflective questions. Hit pause when you're ready, come back, and we'll go again with our final one, looking at performance. And welcome back. So performance is something that needs its own area of attention. And this is where my kind of evaluation, impact measurement, value demonstration preferences come to play. Because looking at the highest level of performance, so that might be how we're performing against program, or how much money we're spending, or the quality of the work that we do, looking at those big areas can just feel massive. And then trying to kind of go, well, we're behind, right? We're late. How do we get that back? That can just feel like a massive task, because there's so many interdependencies and things that come together to affect it. And so when I'm thinking about performance here, what I'm meaning is, yes, overall project performance, and I'm looking at the smaller performance wins. So how do we monitor the small steps along the way to get us to where we need to be? And you could say to me, Phil, well, we kind of do that when we have like a program or a schedule of work, because we know we need to do this first, then this second, then this third, then this fourth. Yeah, I get that to a point. I think it's also about, though, what are the results of those activities? So if those activities are happening, what are we seeing in terms of outcomes and results beyond, taking a sticky note off a wall or ticking a box on a spreadsheet to say, yes, that task has been completed. So how are we monitoring performance at a sort of a micro level and a macro level? And to be clear, that might sound like I'm saying we need to micromanage performance, and that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if, for example, we're having a beginning of the week meeting where we're saying, right, what are we up to this week? What are we going to deliver this week? We need to make sure that we're talking about the small performance wins and the performance outcomes that we're going to see, as well as the big one that, in terms of telling us where we need to get to. So how many cladding panels are you going to fit this week or this shift? Oh, I'm going to fit 84 cladding panels this shift. Okay. All right. So how are we going to know if we're on track? Or because they'll be going up on the wall? Yes. Okay. What else, though? What else is going to tell us that we're kind of moving in the right direction? Oh, people are going to be energized. They're going to be coming in on time for their breaks. They're going to be leaving their breaks once they've had enough and getting back down onto shift. We're going to be feeling confident about what we're trying to achieve. So these kind of smaller performance outcomes, if we understand what we're looking for, we know what we're looking for, we can then start to monitor performance against them to let us know how likely it is that we're going to achieve our overall goal. Also, performance is a feeling. I said at the start of this episode and the last one that you can't think yourself into high performance. So performance, whether it be high or low, is a feeling. It has emotion in it. And so how people are feeling about how the project is performing is really important. So asking people, could be informally, kind of informally over direct message, or informally in the kitchen or in the canteen, asking people how they're feeling about how we're performing gives us a really good indication as to whether performance is going to happen. Because if we're not feeling confident, how are you feeling about cladding panels? Yeah, it's going to be a full-on day today. Okay, that's interesting. Haven't really given me a feeling. You've told me that you're going to be busy, but you haven't told me how you feel. That's interesting. I might want to dig a bit deeper into that and find out a bit more about what's going on. So that component of performance and how people feel about performance is also really important. So as well as having those outcomes and those results that we would expect to see as a result of the activities that we're doing, it's also how are people feeling about how we're performing, or how are people feeling about how we're performing. And then naturally performance brings in all of the other elements as well. So yes, performance overlaps with recognition, because by recognizing the behaviors we want to see, it drives performance. It overlaps with well-being. If somebody has poor well-being, poor emotional well-being in particular, the chances of them being high-performing are really slim. If the communication is poor, the chances of us being high-performing are really slim. If our meetings are terrible, if our decision making is poor, if our relationships aren't great, if there's no accountability. So all of these different elements feed into performance. And I think the real headline for me that I want you to take away from this section in particular is that performance is about how you feel. So finding out how people feel about how we're performing, if you don't do it already, that's going to be something that can start to give you some cues and some clues in terms of where your performance might be and how close you are to being a high-performing team. Okay, so those are the 8. Relationships, accountability, meetings, decision making, communication, well-being, recognition, and performance. Now, what we also experience is, as a result of the work that we do, is improved leadership from individuals and across teams as a result. Because when we think about, yes, the context of what we're doing is looking at these different elements to create a high-performing team, what it also does is it makes better leaders. By having leaders that focus on these 8 different areas, it helps improve their capability as well as leaders in the particular organizations and in the particular projects. So one of our previous participants has said this has been the best leadership development they've ever had, because it's not been theoretical, it's not been abstract, it's not been done on a course in a meeting room somewhere or over Teams. It's real life, hands-on, driving performance in their team, which makes them a better leader as a result. And so that's where I'm going to leave this episode. So we've had 2 different episodes looking at the 8 different areas with some reflective questions in there as well. And so if your team or the team you're involved in are struggling, if they're not performing, if performance isn't where you want or need it to be, chances are at least 3 of those 8 things are probably not working for you. Finding out which ones, creating a really tangible action plan to address them, and then having that on-hand support to embed and make sure that those changes and that shift happens to the point where the team do become high-performing. That is where we come in, because emotion is at the heart of performance. It's at the heart of high-performing teams. And if you can harness it, oh my goodness, can it propel your performance forward? And if you don't, can it drag your performance down? So thank you for listening. If you want to get in touch, you can get us in the show notes. All our contact details are in the show notes. And then we'll look forward to seeing you again soon for our next episode. Thanks very much.